That out very early on and busied themselves buying all the slaves that came into the United States on the East Coast, only to transfer them to the Deep South, whereupon they resold them, making 4, 5, and 6 times as much money as previously invested. 3 major slave markets existed in the Deep South. Now, there were lots of little ones for each town, village, hamlet, burg, crossroads, bump in the road along the way had its own version of a slave market. But the biggies, the major ones, were Natchez, Mississippi, which was Spanish, New Orleans, which was French, and Mobile, Alabama, which at this point in time was English. These 3 markets equaled the output of the rest of the South combined. That's how large they were. The kid John Parker, our hero, ended up in Mobile, where he was placed upon the blocks to be sold for a 3rd time. Not yet 10 years old, the young fellas already had 3 owners. This time he became the property of a doctor who used the lad as a livery mate. He took care of the horses. He was a stable boy. And as the doctor called for his buggy or his buckboard, it was kids working in that livery that would actually hitch up the team, and they would drive the doctor on his appointed rounds and visitations, house calls, whatever business old Doc seemed to have in hand. Upon return to the mansion, they would drop that doctor off, unleash those horses, groom them, where you never put away a horse wet, feed them and restall them, making certain, absolutely certain, that the stalls were clean. This was the work to be done by young men John Parker's age. Now, the doc himself, he had 2 sons of his own. They were younger than John. They were smaller than John. But John sort of took them up under his wing and he mentored them. He taught them to hunt. He taught them to fish. He taught them Indian woodlore, the ways of the woods, just as he had learned. They, in return, while they snuck books from the doc's library, taught young John Parker to read. This was illegal, for you see, most states had it on the books as a law. Those that did not, it was an unspoken mandate that you did not educate a person of color in any fashion whatsoever. For you see, they felt once educated, that person is only going to cause you a lot of problems. Save yourself the grief and bother not to educate. Well, John took to these readings. Oh, he loved it so. He read everything that those kids brought him. Why he read and became quite fond of Shakespeare, he most definitely did. As a matter of fact, as he grew older, had kids of his own, 6 of John's 7 children are named after Shakespearean characters. And I've often asked, well, what in the world was the 7th one named? Quite naturally, that would be John Parker Jr. He read histories of countries and geographies of various countries, periodicals, brochures that arrived by mail at the doc's home. He read the Bible. John even read the doctor's medical books. And if those kids weren't bringing him books and doing so on a regular basis, it was not at all unusual for him to sneak aside one of his favorite books. He'd read that sucker over and over and over and over and over again, almost to the point of memorization. John read like this his entire life, very voraciously. Became a widely educated person of very high intelligence, yet he never, ever, ever set a foot in a classroom. Now, as time rolled along, one day the doc, he pulled John aside, sat him, had a talk with him, a discussion, told him flat out that if he did not want to go to the fields, it would be most wise if he were to take on a trade. Everyone knew that the doc was telling him to be true. For it was in those fields of the Deep South that they worked you to death, and we're speaking literally. So John did take on a trade. He took on a couple, but the one that mattered and the one that made such a difference in his young life was that of a foundry worker. For you see, the young man learned how to make metal pieces in a foundry and found at this time that he had a gift, a talent, a knack. This gift, God-given. Young John Parker learned early in his apprenticeship that he could make the molds for these metal pieces better than the next guy. Well, he could make molds that were fresher and cleaner and much, much more accurate than people that had been doing this for 10, let's say maybe 15 years. Well, they were encouraging John. Boy, they were patting him on his back and telling him, "You go, John Parker, you are the man, you're the dude." But you see, he could not hear this, for he was not listening, and besides that, he was not the man, for he was only a boy of 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And all he could think of at this time was his freedom and how to obtain it. The kid decided, he made the decision, the very best way for him to obtain his freedom was simply to run. For he did have knowledge of the woods. The young man thought he could exist out there in those woods by himself, eager to give this thought a try one day. When no one was looking and all heads were turned, he took off and ran his little heart out. He most certainly did. But it didn't seem to do much good for the dogs. Well, they caught up with John and brought him back. Undaunted, he is to try this again. And yes, he is a fool, those doggone dogs, you betcha. So he decided to escape through the swampland that bordered Mobile. But you see, the kid never counted on the water moccasins that frequent that swamp. Nor did he count on the 50-ton of alligator present there. And besides that, it was the dogs catching up with John once again. Having free time, a free moment, he would go among the wharfs and the docks, the riverbanks of Mobile, watch those steamboats coming and going. Fascinated the kid was with those steamboats. Thought them to be quite majestic. But when the opportunity presented itself, the young man would sneak aboard one and he would hide in bilge rooms, storerooms, pump rooms, cloakrooms, cargo and service areas of all sizes, shapes, hoping to make an escape, hoping not to be detected. Unfortunately, this didn't work either. John was always detected at some point in time, returning to his owner, the doctor. Now, there was a law throughout the South that stated, if your slave escapes from you and is returned, you must punish. Never must you let an escape attempt go unwarranted. Not only must you punish, you must do so in the public view for all to see. For they wanted to discourage slaves from trying to escape. Now, these slaveholders had quite an imagination, you better believe they did. And they punished in quite a number of ways. As a matter of fact, hold on for a second. This phone and this watch is going crazy here. Okay. They punished in a number of ways. The most common and the most often they punished is they would cut your Achilles tendon. Right behind that ankle bone. Just snip that sucker. Man, oh man, that would hurt. No anesthesia to be used here. Not only did it hurt, it rendered her foot to be a club foot, it was dead. Not a thing you could do with it. And if you've seen a slave of the day, that was step and drag. Step, drag. You know automatically. This guy has been a runner. Caught, punished. The message here is very clear. Do not do this, for the very same thing will happen to you. It didn't deter. Slaves still ran. Oftentimes, clubfoot and all. Our hero, John Parker, was never ever punished for his misdeeds or his escape attempts. But the doc, well, old Doc got pretty doggone tired of it all. He most certainly did. For you see, he understood quite well that one day John was going to make good on one of these escape attempts, and he was simply to shag down the road and say, see ya later, Doc. So in order to avoid that situation, the doctor decided now is the time to get rid of John Parker, for you see, he is just too much trouble and has become a royal pain. Place an ad in the paper for his sale, he did. John didn't know. Unawares that he was being sold for a fourth time. Why, these days, old John just kind of bopped along, taking in life as it comes, day at a time. But when he found out, when he understood, when he realized that he was on the blocks to be sold, he panicked, he flipped, he freaked, he lost it. For you see, John knew quite well he was of age, surely to be sold as a field hand, destined for those cotton fields of the deep South. John did not want that to happen, and did everything within the realm and possibility of slavery to change the oncoming set of events. Why, he talked with people, he bargained, he pleaded with people, and he begged. One of the persons John had occasion to speak with at this time was a lady. Very powerful woman this was, very wealthy lady. Had her own plantation, had her own set of slaves. She was a widow, Her name, Elizabeth Ryder. And John asked her, please, oh please, Miss Ryder, would she not buy him from the dock, allow him to pay her back, and thereby gain his freedom in such a fashion? Why, she looked old John square in the kisser, flipped him a half smile, and said, you gotta be joking. Well, you see, she knew John. She was once a patient on the dock. She knew John as a lad. She knew him to be, quote, a bad boy who is only going to run off and leave her holding the bag after she spent all that money and didn't want any part of that situation whatsoever. John talked to other people to no avail. He wrote at this time that he felt like a big dog with a bad name. No one wanted anything to do with him. He was feeling pretty low these days. But finally, as history would have it, as it was written, Miss Ryder, Miss Elizabeth Ryder, had a change of heart. A deal was struck. Now here's the situation. The year is 1842. Kid John Parker, our hero, is 14 and a half years old. The slave market reporting this information to us is New Orleans. And in the marketplace in New Orleans, a young buck in his prime. Now, prime in the marketplace was 20 to 25 years of age. Keep in mind the kid John is only 14. But a young buck in his prime, sound of mind, robust in body, with no problems physically, no illness whatsoever, and the willingness to participate in the institution of slavery. For you did not want to buy a slave that had a rebellious nature. This guy could poison your whole lot. He could mess everything up for you. Most certainly could. Nor did you want to buy a slave that had all those whip marks, whelps, scars, abrasions, contusions on the back and body from the bullwhip. For along with those scars and contusions came problems, usually mental. For there is no way in the world for you to have been beat that often and that severe without suffering some mental anguish. A lot of those guys whose picture you see in the history books with all that scar tissue about their backside had been beat senseless. Their minds, long gone beyond culpability, never ever to return. You want to buy what was called in the marketplace in New Orleans in 1842, a clean back. Now, a person who met this criteria generally sold for $800 to $1,000, which is a lot of money for 1842. But John's deal with Miss Ryder, well, you see, it was for more than that. For Elizabeth, she wanted $1,800 from John before she cleared him and issued his freedom. Undaunted, young John went signed him on the dotted line in a hurry. So the kid saw the light at the end of the tunnel. He saw his freedom out there, and we really do believe John was going to sign those papers, no matter how much he asked. That's just how bad he wanted to be free. Now, the way she worked out the details, she subleased young John to a foundry. Not at all unusual for people of the South to buy and sublease slaves. For many a person living in the cities of the South did not own a farm or plantation who wished to work a slave on, yet they still bought them. They subleased them to restaurants and hotels, riverboats, factories, warehouses, storefronts, whomever needed an employee. They collected their salaries. Many a widow lady, upon the death of her husband, once the funeral expenses were paid and his debts from life were put into check, would take whatever money that was left over, go buy a slave, work that slave, living off of his earnings, no matter how meager or little those earnings just happen to be. For you see, many a day, this may be her only source of income. You must understand this about the South. White women of the South were not permitted to work in public at all. It was not proper for her to do so, nor was it fitting for her to do so. But if she had monies left over after everything was said and done, that she could afford to buy 2, 3, 4, or more slaves, well, she lived pretty big, sure did, lived pretty high up on the hog. And this was the situation that our Miss Ryder was in, where you see Elizabeth lived very, very well off of the backs of her slaves. She subleased young John to this foundry. He had skills. He knew his way around this place. There are historians who think he may have worked in this particular foundry a time or so before, but that's another story. This time, this go round, young John had a quota to manufacture, for this was piecework. Now, once he manufactured his set, once he made his set, His paycheck, his earnings, the money the kid just made, went to Elizabeth. He's her slave. But all that he made over and above that amount, John was permitted to keep, pocket, and therefore keep the deal alive they had agreed upon. John was serious, dead serious, and wanted his freedom very, very badly, would ask to be locked into that foundry of a night, only for them to arrive in the morning and they would find a young fellow hard at work, cranking out his pieces, just working just as hard as he possibly could. He would ask often to be locked in of a weekend, only for them to arrive on Monday and find young John going for his quota with much gusto, taking specially made wheelbarrows and going among the docks, the wharves, the riverbanks, and the waterways of Mobile, unloading those steamers, freighters, side-wheelers, paddle-wheelers, boats of all sorts and sizes, hauling that freight all over Mobile, wherever it needed to go for tips and fees. John was able to pay Miss Ryder that $1,800 that she demanded in its entirety in a year and a half. Fantastic feat for $1,800 by today's standards is a lot of money. In yesteryear, this was a humongous sum. For you see, at that time, a family of 4 could exist very, very well off of $5 a month. How nice would that be to do today? I can use some of that, yeah. That lady told me a couple of weeks ago, $5. Well, that won't even get me into this joint. John was so happy to gain his freedom, he was simply elated. Whoa! He went home, he placed his shirt on the kitchen table, he placed his freedom papers in the middle of the back of it, covered them with another piece of cloth and stitched them up into the back of his shirt as not to lose his papers. He also bought at this time a passport for if you were black or of color and you wanted to ride the river boats of the day, it was a mandatory must that you had a passport. For it was the riverboat captain's responsibility as to whom was on his vessel any given moment. He did not want fugitive blacks on his boat at all, so therefore documentation was the order of the day, and that is where the passport came into play. For you see, it told who you were, who you belong to, where you're going, the nature of your business, how long you plan on staying, when you are to return, and by what means. Young John bought a passport to New Albany, Indiana, which is opposite Louisville on the Ohio River. It is a northern city in a northern state. Worked in a foundry there for 11 months. Saved his money. For you see, the South had laws. Each state, as you bounce across the bottom of this here United States, had a different law, but they all came to the same fruition. And that was that if you gained your freedom in the South, by whatever means, you had to leave it. They did not want you to hang around down there to show the other blacks what it was like to be a free person. So you had to, in essence, as the old saying goes, get out of Dodge. John appeared in 1848 on the banks of the Ohio River at Cincinnati. Wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, and looked for some doggone excitement. 20 years old he was, still wet behind the ears, and by George, he found that excitement. Yes, he did. He booked himself into an area of town in Cincinnati called Bucktown. Black neighborhood of the day this was. Said right on the riverfront in Cincinnati, it did. Riverfront Stadium used to be in that spot. They tore down the Riverfront Stadium. They put the United Freedom Center there in that very same spot, which is one of the reasons why they did so. For this was the site of the old black neighborhood. There in his boarding house, our John Parker met a barber. Now this barber gentleman had been a freed man from Maysville, Kentucky. In Maysville at this point, there were 4 barbers down there that were freed men. And the city fathers of Maysville, they understood quite well. They knew one of these culprits, one of these barbers, was helping slaves to escape at night. The problem? They did not know which one. They selected this gentleman. They asked him to leave Maysville, and they were not very polite about it. But as he left town, he must have been the guilty one. Sure enough, he must have been the culprit. For you see, he knew of 2 young girls that wanted to be free from the institution of slavery. And when he met John Parker in a boarding house and became his roommate, he took the liberty, the time, and the initiative to place this information into John's head. John immediately refused, for he knew better. He knew quite well the consequences He knew if caught, he could go to jail or be resold as a slave or both. He didn't want any part of that mess, especially that slavery crap. He just got out of that. Notice what he told that barber. But that barber, his roommate, was insistent and persistent and kept bugging John and bugging him until he gave in. John did go to Maysville. And for those in the room not certain where Maysville is, it is 10 miles upriver. It is on the Kentucky side. It is the largest city around here, and it is the most important city to us here in Ripley. For you see, it holds our Walmart. I was doing this a few years back, and I made the mistake of saying, John did go to Walmart, where he collected those 2 young girls, and did just as he was instructed, and that was to bring them here to Ripley. Whereupon he witnessed firsthand the Underground Railroad in action. He saw who did what, he saw how this thing worked, and more importantly, John understood for the very first time exactly why this thing had to be. And as those 2 young ladies were leaving out of Mr. Collins' house, which is 2 blocks down the street at Mulberry, heading towards the Rankin Hill, which you guys have already visited, John must have gotten a warm and a fuzzy feeling, for it's here at this point in time, the decision was made. He is to do this for the rest of his life. He had found his calling. He knew why God put him on this earth. He did go back to Cincinnati, however, met and married Miranda Bolden. Miranda Bolden, like he, was a mulatto, half white, half black. The difference being she had never ever been a slave. She had always been a free person of color. They worked at the general store for a year, and with that money and the money John had saved in Indiana, they bought this dirt that we're sitting up on today. Started building this house late 1849, moved into it late 1850. Immediately upon John Parker's arrival into Ripley, he started his work on and became a part of the Underground Railroad. Not only was John a conductor on the Underground Railroad, he was an extractor. Very, very few extractors in our history, especially black ones, where you see extracting is extremely dangerous. The most famous extractor of this time period was Harriet Tubman. She would go into Virginia, bringing slaves from Virginia, making 17 trips into Virginia. John did much the same. He would go into Kentucky, which he called the borderlands, bringing the slaves from Kentucky to Ohio, which he called his promised land. Very, very dangerous work this was, where John been caught any given night, fooling around over in Kentucky like this. Only one question was to be asked, and that's who's got the doggone rope. John was never caught, nor did he ever lose a fugitive. He would bring them across, and he would hand them off to the Underground Railroad workers working the line. Now, when we think about the Underground Railroad, our thoughts almost always often go to hiding places, false floors, false doors, double bottom wagons, secret stashes, the tunnels, either attic, secret rooms. So much fun all this is, but it is only a part of it, and a very small part at that. For they had a chance to interview the slaves themselves, some 30 or 40 years after everything was over, finished, done, no more slavery. They asked those ex-slaves what it was they remember pertaining to the Underground Railroad. They were asked what their thoughts were on the Underground Railroad. The words that they mentioned were not only a surprise, it was a big, big surprise. For almost to a person, one word comes to mind, and that would be hospitality. Why that word? Why that thought? Let's look at this. Let's examine it. In order to do so, you're going to have to use your imagination. I'd like for you guys to come with me on a journey. We're going to do some pretending here. We're going to pretend for a moment that we're slaves, the whole group of us. Now, we're going to be stationed down in Middle Tennessee, which really and truly is not that far down there, but we are walking, so it is a long, long way. Now, the guy that owns us, not a very nice guy, has not treated us well at all. So we want to make a change in our situation. We are going to put our heads together. We are going to plan an escape. We're getting the heck out of here. We're going to choose a very dark, moonless night. A night so skeletal that once you put your hand in front of your face, it would be hard to see. And on this dark and forlorn night, we're to wait patiently, quietly for the dogs to settle in, quiet down, get their rest, stop all that doggone barking and yelping. Once that happens, We are to gather together everything that we own in this whole wide world. We're going to wrap a rag around it and tie it to a stick. And we're going to sneak. We're going to crawl right up to the main house. And we're going to intently listen. And what we're waiting to hear is, well, you see our owner, he snores a bit. And once that happens, we know he's asleep and we can make our move. Okay, signal has been given. The old guy's snoring pretty good. Freedom's now at hand. I hope you guys are ready. But first a little apprehension sets in. For we have come to realize, we have come to understand that we have never ever been past the gates of this place. We have not a clue as what the outside world holds. And this thing that we hear talk of called freedom, well, we don't really know what that is. But we do know this. We're sure of one thing, and that is anything at all is better than this. So, let's make our move. First order of business is those doggone dogs. Word, let a sleeping dog lie. Now, once we make foot off of that plantation, once we get on our way, we have one major problem in front of us. And it's not getting caught. That's another problem. The problem that we have before us, the big one, is that we don't have anything to eat. We weren't overfed in the first place. We may have had a couple of biscuits. We put them biscuits into our knapsack that we made up, that little packet that we made up. We nibbled off those biscuits just to make them suckers last. We have been eating grapes of the vine, berries of the bush, when and where we can find them, if we're lucky to find them. We don't have a gun. We cannot hunt. We don't have a fishing pole, and besides that, who among us really has the time to sit on the bank and catch a night's fish, let alone cook it? Fires at night can be seen from a distance. In the daytime, it produces smoke that can be seen for miles. So no fire, not at all. We must run all night long chasing down that North Star. We hide in the daytime under concealment. Rose bushes, thorn bushes, lilacs, mulberries. If it hides us, it's a very good bush. We were told before we left that plantation, before we left Middle Tennessee, the old ladies warned us. They told us flat out, leave the farms that you pass along the way, leave them be. For if you're to rustle some chickens out of someone's coop or a ham out of someone's smokehouse, and they detected that you have been through there, even if this was 2 to 3 days later, they are to alert the county sheriff or the constable, we are in his area. Once alerted, this guy is to bring out the dogs. And once the dogs came out, we stand a 60% chance of being caught. Very difficult to elude the dogs, especially for the first timer, as a group of us would be. It was written. In order to elude the dogs, you needed a wealth of experience and a whole lot of luck. Once caught, that guy, that sheriff, that constable is going to return us to our owner, who is not going to be happy, and that means a group of us went for a good sound beating once again. But that sheriff, he's going to be extremely happy, for there is a bounty to be had, a reward. $5, $10 for each head returned, and if he is lucky enough to catch in amongst us a person that has a skill, a masonry person, a cabinet maker, shoemaker, carpenter, roofer, distiller, metal man like John Parker, he could get $400, $500, $600 for that guy by himself. Cha-ching! That's the jackpot. That's the lotto. For you see, that is more money than that sheriff is to make in his whole entire life. He's not going to hesitate, not one iota, to bring them dogs out. Been waiting for this opportunity. So let us be wise, taking the advice of the old ladies, and leaving the farms that we pass along the way, leaving them be. But that is definitely not to say what we would do if we're on the verge of starvation. For if you're looking old man hunger dead in the face, that means you do not have a conscience, nor do you have common sense, and will do whatever is necessary in order to live. But once you're in the hands of the Underground Railroad people, you were fed. You were moved to the next station, and you were fed. You were moved to the third safe house, and the food was also good. And this was the hospitality that was recollected some 30 or 40 years later. Not hiding in somebody's doggone basement or a dusty old attic for 2 or 3 days. The Ripley chain was gigantic. The Ripley chain was tremendous. It was much, much bigger than those by a heck of a lot, which is why you guys were here. There were 329 people in 1841 on the roster of the abolitionists. Names and addresses are still on file down at our public library, which we call Underground Central. And nowhere, I do mean nowhere, in this here United States are you to find an abolitionist society anywhere near that large. Not even close. But not all those 329 folks moved folks through their homes. Those that didn't participate in other manners, for it was not at all unusual to see little old ladies just getting it about the streets of Ripley during the daytime, carrying a great big old pot of beans from one house to the other in order to feed the fugitives crossing that evening. They collected monies. It did take monies to feed these people. Ripley was a town at this time that was blessed with six shoemakers. Now, there is no way in the world a town this size needs 6 shoemakers. And I know that to be so, because my wife, she did not live in this town. Or if she did, those 6 shoemakers would not have been enough. Yet they flourished and prospered, and as fast as they made those shoes, the Underground Railroad people bought them, reissuing them at night. And for many a person coming up from the very deep reaches of this here United States, passing through Ripley, oftentimes it was their very first pair of shoes. They're going to need them, for as they go further north and possibly into Canada, they may be experiencing what might be their very first winter. And as we all know, Mr. Winter generally insists you put your doggone shoes on. Now, Ripley also learned very early on is to make those slaves change their clothes. They understood quite well that the slave catchers did not know these slaves up close and personal. And they were looking for a person, say 5'8" in height, with a blue shirt and a green pair of pants on. Once you took that blue shirt and green pair of pants from that person, he no longer exists. They would take those clothes, sew those tatters, patch those holes, and wash those clothes, hold up before they reissued them. We're not going to put you in the jeopardy of the last guy's blue shirt and green pair of pants. Now, John Parker rescued some 600 to 900 people in his time of field. One day in 1900, old John, he did not feel too well, went back to bed, and there he died 2 days later. He was 73 years of age. Had maintained that none of his children should go into the foundry business. He and Miranda, they didn't have that problem. But they had raised 7 kids, all of which were college educated. It's unique in any family, in any culture, in any time slot, have all the kids of a family educated by colleges. Particularly here, for blacks, well, they just weren't taught to that level to begin with. But as a sidebar to that information, all of John Parker's grandkids, college educated. He'd also maintained that upon his demise of Miranda, his wife not operate the foundry, and that she should sell it. Honoring his wishes, she sold his house. She sold his foundry. She sold his accumulated real estate and dissolved the remains of his 17 separate businesses. She moved to Cincinnati, where she took up residency in Indian Hill. Indian Hill is the exclusive part of the city of Cincinnati. It is where the millionaires live then and today. She resided in Indian Hill until 1929, whereupon she succumbed to a cerebral hemorrhage, having 2 of her daughters in tow. One of them followed her in death the next year, 1930. The other one stayed on at that Indian Hill address until 1950, teaching in the Cincinnati public school systems quite a number of years. Consequently, the school board of the city of Cincinnati named the school after her father, the John P. Parker Elementary School, which visited us 4 years back pre-COVID with 529 kids. Wow. That's what I said. Bringing this lovely t-shirt behind my head. John also maintained that upon his demise that his body be cremated, and the ever faithful Miranda, following his wishes, carried his body to the city of Cincinnati, whereupon the Chicago Broadax, a newspaper of the day out of Chicago, wrote, John Parker of Ripley, Ohio, was cremated today in Cincinnati, such and such a time, such and such a place, becoming the very first black man in the United States to be cremated. Now, as interesting as that sounded, the part that intrigued me the most is why in the world did they write about old John in Chicago? For you see, if I were to kick the bucket this afternoon here in Ripley, I guarantee you this. Not a soul in Chicago is going to know anything about it or care for that matter. When I found out that they did know John Parker in Chicago, they did care. For he produced items out of his foundry that he sold all along the eastern seaboard through the waterways, had applied for and received 3 U.S. patents for his inventions, one of but 6 blacks to receive a U.S. patent in the 1800s. His cash cow, his moneymaker, was added to tobacco press. Never was John able to make this item in quantities necessary to meet the demand for it. They still use it today in the tobacco industry. The 1890 census tells us that there were eight millionaires located here in Ripley. John Parker was listed on that very same census as the 9th wealthiest person. Not a millionaire was he, but he was a very wealthy man, his family not in need. He advertised heartily his wares from his foundry in the newspapers of New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Louisville, St. Louis, Chicago, Iowa, Minnesota, Vicksburg, Mississippi, New Orleans, Ripley, and Cincinnati. And in any of those cities, at any given moment, were you to open up a newspaper, the name John Parker would jump right out of one of those ads dead on you. And if you did not know who he was, you most certainly would be aware of him. Any questions on the life and times of John P. Parker?